What's up everyone and welcome back to the channel. A few weeks ago I did a video, Forgotten Underrated Pop Punk Bands from the last 20 years. That video was really well received. I also got some really good comments on some bands which I missed, and I thought I would follow that up with a Forgotten 2000s bands which people don't really talk about anymore, but I thought could have been one of the next big things, 15, 20 years ago. Considering the music industry is so large, there are so many festivals, so many ways to purchase music and to listen to music, with so many genres out there and so many bands, a lot of bands can fall by the wayside and get a little bit forgotten, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily a bad band. There can sometimes be certain conditions, such as record labels dropping them, popularity of the genre declining, members leaving. In fact, there have been bands which are split up because members get sick. And I find the 2000s to be very interesting because this was when pop punk was actually getting a little bit mainstream, and then sort of that emo pop punk went and got very popular as well. Think Fall Out Boy and Paramore. And then of course pop rock and just mainstream rock was really big as well. Think about bands like the Goo Goo Dolls and Hoobastank. If you enjoy these videos, please do hit the subscribe button. It is the most helpful thing that you can do for the channel. And with that out the way, thanks so much guys, let's get into it. Band number 1, Wheatus. Now I'm sure many of you know this band from their major hit, Teenage Dirtbag, along with their cover of Respect. They had a very successful touring career. They actually just finished a tour with Hoobastank, who again are another forgotten, slightly underrated band, I would say. They provided the theme song for TV shows, and they have somewhat of a cult following. When they played a festival a few years ago in the UK, people were actually like pouring out of the tent, which is pretty cool. I actually saw them way back in 2001, playing a venue in my hometown for 1,700 people. Then interestingly, 10 years later in 2011, I saw them in the same town, but this time playing a venue which only held 270 people. Their first two major albums, the self-titled Wheatus album, which had all kinds of hits on it, along with Hand Over Your Loved Ones, which I thought was a fantastic album, really underrated album. I thought that they would definitely be like a bigger band than they are. I'm not saying they should be as big as Goo Goo Dolls or Blink-182, but they certainly should be bigger than playing small theaters, if that makes sense. At least maybe like an amphitheater band, okay? However, the early 2000s saw a decline in the popularity of rock, and particularly pop rock as well. And I think one of the major reasons where Wheatus slightly fell off was they had a disagreement with their record label, Sony that is. They re-released it, I do believe, under the name Suck Phony. Do you understand that play on words? Yeah, it's pretty funny. This was also around the time when things like MySpace were kicking off, and the popularity of pop punk, alternative rock, emo, screamo, post-hardcore, those were really blowing up, and there wasn't really much room for Wheatus in this music scene, I guess you could say. Band number 2, Drowning Pool, who I'm sure you may remember for their massive hit, Bodies. What a sing-along song. Now, Drowning Pool were riding that wave of new metal, post-grunge, industrial rock, which was going on at the time, like 1998 to 2003, that's when this was really big. I mean, look at any Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtrack or Madden soundtrack or snowboarding game or wrestling soundtrack from the time. A lot of these bands will be on there. Think about Powerman 5000, Head PE. Now, I don't want to say the Drowning Pool are a bit of a one-hit wonder, but it is quite evident in the fact that if you look at their streaming pages, the most popular songs, in fact, the only popular songs that people are listening to and streaming on there happen to be from that album way back like 20 years ago. And since then, they've faded into quite a bit of obscurity. They still make festival appearances. They obviously have a fan base. They still tour. They still do stuff. But in terms of mainstream popularity, and we're talking like, say if you go to a big festival like Download Festival or Ozfest or one of those kind of things, that it's unlikely to see Drowning Pool on there. And if you do, they might be, pretty low on the bill. Bit of obscurity there. And those songs, they still get a lot of streams. They actually have like millions of listeners on Spotify, but this is probably due to the fact that that song Bodies is also on a bunch of playlists as well. It's to be expected. Band number 3, Autopilot Off. This band came to my attention way back in, I think, 2003 when the snowboarding game SSX3 came out. Now this band were akin to other bands at the time who were very popular in the punk rock and pop punk scene. Think about Sugar Cult, Yellowcard, the Ataris, who I do believe a couple of those bands they toured with way back then. I really liked this band because they leaned more on the punk rock side of things rather than just pop punk, kind of similar more to, I would say, MXPX and the heavier Yellowcard music, which is cool. And this was a very, very popular time for this genre. However, Autopilot Off, I think they released like 2 albums and then bounced, which is weird because they were actually pretty well known. I know that off the top of my head, I remember they had a lot of friends or followers or whatever it was on MySpace, but it was by about 2005 they actually jumped away from their record label, which I think was Island. So again, it sounds like there was some kind of disagreement. I have no idea. Would love to get one of the members on for an interview, so if anyone's in touch with them, holler at me, that'd be rad. This thing happens. Sometimes bands get dropped by the label if the genre's not popular enough, if the album doesn't sell enough, if the tours aren't big enough and bringing in enough money, then the label will drop them. Or if the band want to do something with their sound and the label says, no, do this, do this, do this, they might depart the label and then things start to implode. It's more difficult to get funding for recording albums. It's more difficult to get funding for big, massive tours when you got tour bus and crew members and guitar techs and merch guys and buying merchandise and selling merchandise. Without a label backing you, that can be a lot more difficult. Of course, there are labels out there that they could have gone to, I guess, like Fueled by Ramen might have been a bit more of a better option. Epitaph, something like that. But yeah, who knows? Don't know what happened to them, but definitely considering that they were pretty popular there, they could have definitely been up there with Yellowcard. And who knows? Band number 4, OK Go. Now, I don't know what the average age of my audience is, but I'm 30. If you're around the same age, you probably remember this video going viral before going viral was a thing. Now has 56 million views. It also got a few awards for like best video back in the day, best music video. They aren't necessarily forgotten. They're just less mainstream than they were 15 years ago. This is evident with other bands as well. Think about bands like The Kooks, those sort of indie rock, mainstream rock bands which are a bit more obscure now. I wouldn't say that OK Go are necessarily forgotten. Definitely have a solid fan base and they're still going, releasing music, and they're still about. They got a good career going. They still play gigs and festivals every now and then. I imagine that their target audience is those kind of middle class kids who wear like Hollister shirts or Superdry shirts and go to gigs and festivals and smoke one joint and think they're really, really rebellious. I would expect to see OK Go playing at some like middle class festival where a lot of people sit on the grass on picnic blankets and, you know, drink bottles of cider. Final band who I briefly already mentioned in my pop punk video, I do believe, and that is Motion City Soundtrack. Now, I think they were scheduled to play the Slam Dunk Festival in the United Kingdom last year, a festival which is notorious for getting bands to reunite for like a one-off appearance, which is pretty cool. I don't have much to say about this band, but again, they were in 2006 just, oh my god, so big. They were touring with some of the all-time greats like Blink-182, Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco, that kind of thing. Riding on that pop-punk emo wave like I already mentioned. Their song, I actually was in Australia a few years ago and like I just heard it on the radio whilst driving in Australia, and sometimes you might just hear it, you know, anywhere. I'm really not sure what happened with the momentum of that band, but considering that everyone had their singles as like their MySpace profile songs back in the day, and they were on those major tours, it seems like them being dropped by Columbia Records was a little bit of the culprit in that situation. Like I said, this can definitely slow you down a bit, and I'm sure this is probably due to the fact that there were a bunch of other bands who were massive doing that kind of thing, but Motion City Soundtrack just weren't quite as big as those bands, and therefore the investment on the record label side of things was probably less beneficial. Yeah, they're still doing bits and bobs now, it does seem, but yeah, I definitely think they were good enough and big enough to, again, have been one of those at least headlining theaters on a constant basis. There is some information online as well mentioning that, you know, the band were in their 30s and you don't really want to be on the road all the time and doing stuff, which is again very, very understandable. Touring can be extremely exhausting and extremely grueling, especially if it's your full-time job or your primary source of income. Awesome, guys. Well, I really enjoyed this video. I'm gonna leave a few runners up and honorable mentions down in the comment section, and guys, if you could do the same thing, that would be absolutely legendary. Thank you guys so much for watching. One more time, hit that subscribe button. It is the most helpful thing that you can do for the channel, and I will see you soon.